Well, hello everyone. It's Brian Brown. I am here with my good friend Levon Vazadze, and we have news that you won't believe. After everything that Levon has gone through as a hero for the pro-family movement around the world, after being poisoned, almost dying, his beautiful family having to go all through this, the government of Britain has decided to put him under sanctions, which is just absolutely unbelievable. And today is the first day since the news broke, and I called Levon and I said, "We've got to do something. We've got to get the news out." We have Joe Wilson here in the United States who's pushing the Megabari Act. People are going after Georgia, trying to attack Georgia and its independence. And now Britain comes in with this egregious attack on both Levon and Georgia. So, Levon, can you talk a little bit about the backstory to this? And then we'll get into the meat of the fact that the government of Britain, of which you've been a friend and lived, has decided to put you under sanctions.
Hi, Brian. Thank you for having me on, and hello to all our American and Western conservative friends. Yeah, it came as a surprise. I guess I should have known. The question is why now? Because I've been after the near-death experience and the lethal illness that was most likely induced upon me and never investigated after 24 courses of chemo and almost losing my wife and 8 children and losing the father because he died and didn't survive. I've been back taking care of my health, my family, my business, and I've been out of the picture from the public scene for almost a year and a half. And yesterday, the sanctions came out accusing me of, as always, as with every conservative around the world, being a Russian spy and being a media mogul, which is another lie because I decided to launch my podcast and television channel on Georgian cable after I was basically banned from every Georgian liberal TV station. And that channel has also been switched off for last year and a half. So, what kind of a media mogul am I? I'm not shedding any crocodile tears. I'm thanking God for all the temptations and troubles that He allows upon me. And I know that the faith in our Lord Jesus Christ and love of our family and friends is all one needs to get by in this life. So thank God for everything. And again, thank you very much for this podcast.
Well, I know you, Levon. I know you well, and I know your family, and I know you're going to take this well. But the reality is that countries are attacking people for no other reason than they've stood up for life and family in their own countries. And this example of Britain putting you under sanctions makes absolutely no sense. As you just said, you've been out of the public eye for a year and a half. To put you under sanctions in Georgia to say that you somehow you're behind the war in Russia or whatever other nonsense. Can you talk a little bit about the reality that for so many years you've been the one leading the charge for sovereignty for Georgia, for Georgia staying out of wars, but also for Georgia getting its territory back from Russia? Can you talk a little bit about all of this and why this makes no sense?
Oh, yeah, with pleasure. No, I mean, having been among one of the very first Georgians to be educated in the US, having very close ties in the West, having traveled there many times. When the Russo-Georgian War happened in 2008, I fled with my family via Azerbaijan and Istanbul to settle in the UK and to live there because I had my reasons to believe that if the Russian army advanced all the way to Tbilisi and toppled the neocon guided, provocative, and cruel regime of Mikhail Saakashvili, my affinity and love towards Russian culture and Russian people aside, I had my reasons to believe that I would be among the very few Georgians that the Russians would urge to cooperate in helping manage the country simply due to my vast contact base during my years in business in Russia after my US MBA. Sort of an ideal plot for a Kremlin spy. And the very thing yesterday's sanctions accused me of from Great Britain almost 20 years later. Now, I've never hidden the fact that I love Russian culture, Russian literature. Which educated and cultured person couldn't? Russian people, we have the same faith, but Orthodox Christian faith. But every Russian conservative of modern times who knows anything about Georgia will tell you that the most difficult Georgian for them is myself because they know that I am completely unbreakable in my peaceful, friendly demands that Georgia should give back to Russia should give back to Georgia, Abkhazia, and Tskhinvali region, allow the return of our refugees who were exiled as a result of genocide. And I do not want to commit a suicide by instigating another war against Russia because of this. The very thing that Ukraine fell victim to. I don't want my country to be a tool in the hands of liberal globalists who want to use our countries as burning sticks to light as many fires as they can in their unstoppable idiotic Russophobia. And so I've dedicated my very life to this. Along the lines of protecting family values, Christian values, with great men like yourself. And because for many years I did this without requesting anything in return, this unexpected rise of my so-called popularity in Georgia always prompted me or pulled me into the practical Georgian politics. And I always stayed out of it, sensing the danger, sort of pitying my family and not wanting to put Nino, my wife, and my children through this. I guess for the liberals and the radical globalists, I became sort of a mortal enemy when they tried to impose forcefully the so-called parades of people with no shame on the streets of Tbilisi. And that was when the push came to shove. And our church said no to this, and we have said no to this for many years. And of course, they've depicted me as this sadist who wants to go and bash and kill gays and everything every conservative has to go through. Um, Charlie's recent tragic death notwithstanding. I mean, all of us who've been in this for many years know what we're dealing with, what kind of insidious, unforgiving cruelty we're up against. And every time people tell us, oh, let them walk around and do whatever they want, here is the proof of the level of aggression and the level of cruelty. Imagine all of a sudden, for no reason, on completely false accusations, they issue yesterday while I was in a business meeting these sanctions on me, and they go ahead and do something that fascists and communist Bolsheviks did. They block the bank accounts of my wife, of my 8 children, of my mother, who is nearly 80, who was widowed because my father, who had diabetes, died because he couldn't withstand the stress of me being poisoned and passed away, and I couldn't even bury him. My sister, my wife's winery, Even I'm telling you, this is the handwriting. I'm remembering your great president, Ronald Reagan, who said that if fascism ever comes back to the United States, it's going to be in the form of liberalism. And this is what we are dealing with. And what do? You're a rugby man, you're a family man. Your beautiful wife, Susan, and your beautiful nine children have visited us in Georgia and spent phenomenal time together with our 17 children and the two couples. And what do you do as a rugby veteran and as a father and as a family man when, uh, for no just reason, for on completely false accusations, you receive another blow like this after the near death experience I went through? You cross yourself, you thank God for his mercy, you don't show any of your bruises, and you continue. You work, you pray, and you speak the truth, which you are now allowing me to do, and I'm, as always,
Well,
very grateful.
well, you know what I think, Levon. I mean, I think it is critical that our government and Donald Trump realizes he just was on this great tour to Britain, the second state visit. He was there with King Charles, and he was, treated well. And Starmer was there trying to act like and be respectful. And then the next day, they go after a true friend of the United States. They go after someone who stood up for life and family uh, in a way that makes absolutely zero sense. Do you think part of this uh, has to do with the fact that, you and I are I mean, in some ways similar in that we talk to a lot of people, we work with a lot of people, we realize that all around the world we need to be willing to work with people who may not share everything, that we may have some differences but share some basic principles, but we're willing to talk to people. And they've come after me for saying, well, you've been to Ukraine, you've been to Russia, you've been to Taiwan, you've been all over the world. What are you doing? I had the FBI taking me off airplanes saying, well, why are you all over the world meeting all these people? So you think part of this is the fact that you've worked hard to stand up for your country. You've worked hard for to reunite your country, to make sure that in the best way possible, which is through diplomacy, because obviously we see that war is an absolute disaster. That your friendships in Russia are what they're trying to pin this on, because this other stuff about being a media mogul or a spy or whatever else they're trying. This is nonsense. And anyone that knows you knows this is nonsense. This makes me think that their intelligence is even worse than I thought with this Christopher Steele dossier on Trump, where they just make things up and they have a dossier that Hillary Clinton buys into. And Steele is supposed to be this great spy who, worked for Britain at the highest levels. And it's a total fail. In this case, what do you think it is? You think they just want to get you, or do they think it's friendships that you've had in Russia and around the world? Why are they targeting you now when you're out of the public eye? You're focused on your business and your family.
I hold too high of a regard for the quality, expertise, and resource base of British intelligence, the MI6, to
Yeah.
think that they don't know. I was the only Georgian to accuse me of supporting the war in Ukraine. I was the only Georgian who, immediately after the war began, announced that at our Christian school in Georgia, we are opening a Russian Ukrainian language section in which the refugees of the Ukraine war will be received in that year free of charge and can study at our private school, be fed, trained in sports, in various crafts, free of charge. And after, when we assembled this section, it continued working with a few dozen kids from both Russia and Ukraine. I looked after them as after my kids. And then when the initial shock and tensions have settled, most of the kids and their parents went elsewhere, and we ended up closing the section, which worked for a couple of years. Uh, they cannot not know that, for example, my Ukrainian friends, one of my very important Ukrainian friends who's a businessman, has a wife and children who had to stay in Moscow, and he works in Ukraine looking after his business. And the only way the family reunites is like refugees. Every time the man is let out on the permission of his government, they come to my house to meet in Georgia. And I provide everything I can in accordance with the traditions of Georgian hospitality. And I consider this my honor. I'm being accused of backing the war. There are million videos of me saying that my heart bleeds in this war, which I consider a brotherly war between the brother nations. And I call for its immediate cessation. And President Trump's plan to do everything he can to end this war, I think he's quite right when he says it probably wouldn't have happened if he were the president instead of Biden. And for me resisting reigniting Georgia as another war, which I'm sure President Trump would be against, and for me to be punished by the Britons for this on completely false accusations of being some media mogul and a Russian spy. I think to answer your question finally, and forgive my emotional Georgian chaotic rant, I think they know very well what they're doing. If immediately after my falling ill, as a former professional rugby player, I've almost never been ill. And the moment I announced I'm forming a social movement and entering the politics, I fall ill with a form of blood cancer, which is caused by radiational poisoning. And Heidelberg and Mayo Clinic and Harvard, who looked after me and tried to save me, immediately raised questions. How could this happen? Flat out. And why did I survive? How did this rebound take place? One of the doctors even mentioned Agent Orange, which was used 50 years ago in Vietnam to poison the battlefields. And after these battles, many of the participants of the battles on both sides had multiple myeloma, the illness I had. But that was before the invention of computers and nanotechnologies 50 years ago. Imagine where these technologies have gone now. So we don't know how precisely this was done. But think about this, the moment in a near death condition when I could no longer breathe, walk, sleep, I asked my wife to get me a ticket, a plane ticket to fly to Istanbul to a very good hospital to get my checkup from Georgia. That was in the evening. And in the morning, the plane takes off. And all the Georgian liberal channels from which I was banned announced that I was poisoned and I'm dying and I'm being taken to Turkey. What is this? And in the evening, when I survived and my condition immediately after I removed myself from my motherland started to improve, despite the shocking news of the diagnosis. They removed this from the news and never investigated. Not one journalist ever since what happened, and the state didn't investigate either. And so, if I had any doubts that this extremely rare illness, which befell upon me within the weeks upon my announcement that I'm finally taking this self-sacrificing step into the practical politics instead of just blocking the parades of perverts and just opposing open borders policy in Georgia and just opposing casinos on every corner and just opposing rampant drug problem on the streets of Tbilisi. The moment I sort of took the step, crossed the Rubicon, everything I did became unforgivable. And watching Charlie die like this um, chokes me up right now. We don't cry, fathers and you know veteran ruggers don't cry. But watching this great man, this great friend who emerged out of nowhere with this raw talent, evolved. We all have our differences. We all, the conservatives, traditionalists, Eronuli people, as we call them in Georgia, we all have our differences. Some of you are more sort of neutral on what's going on in Gaza. We think it's a tragedy and genocide, and we weep for the Palestinians and the troubled Jewish people, like we weep for both sides, Ukrainians and Russians. But the one thing any sane father, any hardworking man, any warrior in his psyche doesn't want is to reignite another conflict and war. And I guess my final answer to your great question is blessed are the peacekeepers because they will be called the children of God. And I have no ambition or arrogance to call myself that, but I certainly try and I look at the great men like you and your friends in the United States and cannot but admire your courage, Tucker's courage, Steve Bannon's courage, President Trump's courage. Look at what he has gone through. Look at the bullet that ripped off part of his ear and how he stood up and how he continued to fight. And I'm long past this naive expectation that, when Trump was the president during his first term, and I was standing in the Garden of Vera trying to blocking this shameful so-called parade, I addressed him, you remember, in English language, asked him for his help. And I understand he's too busy as the great man and the president of the great country with his own enemies. But I do believe that just like these anti-family, anti-Christian, anti-sovereign nation demons support each other, we as the conservatives must always stand by each other. And so your fight is my fight, and my fight is your fight.
Well, you know I'm with you 100%, Levon, and I think that we're similar in looking at someone, who's such a hero like Charlie Kirk. And look, our side can have differences, but the one thing that's most important is that we come together and learn from one another and have friendships, true friendships. And I've learned so much from you. I've learned so much from my friends in the in Central and Eastern Europe that's opened my eyes. I mean, the reality is that on issues from Ukraine to Israel to neoconservatism, too many conservatives were pushing war, 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 war. And one thing that was great about Charlie and all the campuses he visited, he always talked about the fact that conservatives, we don't want war. The real conservatives, we want this to end. We want to use diplomacy. We want to uh, try and have compromise. We know, looking back through our history, our uncles, friends, uh, fathers, what went on in Vietnam. We're not saying that there's never a justification for war, but it is a last case. And for us Americans, so many of us right now, um, going back to what Britain has done to you, so many of us are questioning, and we have the right to question. People can have their different views on Ukraine. We're questioning how we can spend $180 billion when our streets are falling apart, where we have drugs everywhere, where Trump is starting to clean things up, but $180 billion. I don't think people understand how much money that is. And, America's a generous country, but we need to focus on America, and we can't be focusing on never-ending wars. And so, if Britain thinks that, for example, Tucker or others, me, questioning uh, all of this money that we're spending and saying enough's enough, or even Trump, who then why not put Trump or Tucker under sanctions? They're not going to do that. They want to make an example of you, and so uh, we're not going to let them do that. We're going to do everything we can to make this public. I do hope that people with much bigger shows. I'm a little guy, but I do have some followers, and I'm hopeful that they will get the word out. That's someone like Tucker, who just had our friend Father Josiah Trenum on his show, who's a
Came to Georgia, who came to Tbilisi and gave one of the greatest speeches on the World Congress of Families in 2016. And people love him and remember him. People on the streets asked me, Levan, where do you find Americans like Brian Brown and Father Josiah? And I say, these are family men. Look, I hold no grudges even against the British because I grew up on the Beatles, on the Rolling Stones, on Georgian genius director Robert Sturua's genius interpretations of William Shakespeare. Which Georgian member of intelligentsia didn't read Thomas More, both Roger and Francis Bacon's, and didn't enjoy the phenomenal humor of Jerome, and didn't, sort of adore the Soviet remakes of cartoons of Kipling's Mowgli and Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes. Sort of for us, not just the British, but the West in general, were the example of freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and the indication of normality. And this decay, which is now going on. When I lived in Kent, in Sevenoaks, in Britain, a friend of mine from Georgia came with a book of a great Georgian professor who was martyred and executed on the streets most likely at the order of the neocon globalists, Guram Sharadze. And using this book, we climbed into the forgotten part of the cemetery behind the St. Nicholas's Church in Sevenoaks and found the graves of brother and sister Sir Oliver Wardrobe, who was the first ambassador uh, to Caucasus of the Great Britain and wrote a great book called Kingdom of Georgia, and his sister Marjorie Wardrobe, who translated Night in Panther Skin by Shota Rustaveli, the epic 12th century poem. And as a sign of our respect towards British culture, just to show that even if the descendants of these great people forget their graves, we the Georgians won't. So we cleaned the grave, we brought flowers to it, and looked after it as a sign of our respect towards the British culture. And that's the Britain that I love. And I am one of the 2 million people who were on the streets of London. In that sense, I hate Britain to see wiped out, lose its spiritual soul, spiritual roots. And I want to say, I'm just going to wait for this liberal, cruel regime in Great Britain to change and for Great Britain to issue a friendly apology to me and lift these sanctions. I may be naive, Brian. I know how these things work, but I do not want, I always say this, just like no one will ever convince me that whatever is wrong with Georgia is all Georgian. And no one will ever convince me whatever is wrong with Russia is all Russia. And there isn't million things I love about Russian culture. Right? Same thing with the West. You give me a good American Texan steak and watch a football game together, which is a light version of rugby for you and I. What could be better?
I've got a
That's
football game
my,
today.
that's
I wish you were here with
That's
me so I could take you to a football game today, but they've made that impossible too.
absolutely. And that's my America, And Ernest Hemingway's phenomenal literature is my, and William Faulkner's, and Ezra Pound's poetry is my America. And I'm not going to let any liberal idiot take it away from me, no matter how many sanctions they place upon me. Now we're consulting with my great friends, British friends, what to do, lawyers, PR. I don't know. Maybe I'll write an op-ed in Spectator or somewhere if they publish it, like an open letter to my British friends. When I played rugby in British Veterans League, after I returned back home, I invited this veterans team, Acorns from Sevenoaks, to play with us. And because Georgian veteran rugby players are all lazy and don't practice, I proposed that we prepare for the visit of the British. And half of us ended up in the hospital even before the British team visited us because we all got injured in the practices. And they came and we had a great game, and there was such a phenomenal unity. And now to accuse me of being an enemy of the West and the justifier of any war, that's the sadism and the cruelty and the blindness of the liberal ideology. And look, if Britain and the United States want to make enemies out of people like me, what hope do they have? I hereby, jokingly but very seriously, ask President Donald Trump to appoint Brian Brown as the ambassador of the United States in Tbilisi, if they want to uplift the image of the U.S. And Brian, thank you so much for the support. I have nothing but tremendous admiration for the courage of American conservatives. Again, Charlie's death was a shock to me, just like the explosion and the killing of Daria Dugina, my friend Alexander Dugin, who was completely against Georgia, had no information about us. I met him in 2015, and ever since, Alexander never said anything against Georgia, and I'm eternally grateful to him. And that's my guilt. I'm guilty of turning uh, friendly to Georgia, a great Russian thinker and philosopher. And so I think, I often say that your courage, your example, look at Charlie's tragedy again, Candice, Tucker, Judge Andrew Napolitano, Colonel Lawrence Wilkinson, Colonel Douglas McGregor. These are my America. These are my West. And no sanctions will scare me from being friends with you and separating from you.
You know that the reverse is true also, that I'm not scared. We've been through a lot, you've been through much more. And that's why this is so sad, because it's part of a trajectory. And Charlie's death is too. I mean, look, the left, the liberals went crazy, especially after our victories in Proposition 8 on marriage. I think especially on the LGBT and trans issues, this Antifa, Trantifa, whatever you're going to call it, they went nuts. And there was already uh, uh, the many liberals pushed this on by the rhetoric of calling us fascist. What they all knew, we had condemned fascism repeatedly. They all knew we despised communism, we despised fascism, and that it didn't matter. What they were going to do is to call anyone around the world who stood up for their traditional culture, for their sovereignty, for their religion, especially Christianity. They were going to go after them. And there's a much deeper and longer story. And I think we should have a second round to go into the backstory of how Christina Pushaw, that some of these people are deeply embedded within the Republican Party, and that Christina Pushaw, who was the press secretary of Governor DeSantis, and this is, nothing against Governor DeSantis. I don't know what his views are on this, but I do know that Christina Pushaw wrote this article just attacking you and saying the most vile things about you because she had worked for Saakashvili, who had done so many things and had unfortunately convinced many Americans that he was great, but had done so many things to undermine the church, so many things to undermine business, had thrown, I believe he even threw you in jail. He threw all sorts of people in jail under the idea that he was cleaning up corruption, when what he was doing was using the idea of cleaning up corruption to be corrupt. And we see this
Yeah,
all
and
over the world. So I've
yeah, and
gone in this
I
direction to
escaped.
just say that the
Yeah,
poisoning.
I escaped and avoided the jail under Saakashvili miraculously. But Christina,
Okay,
who
you didn't
thank
get
you,
any jail under Saakashvili. You were
thank
out, but
God, they threatened me. They demanded bribes, which I refused, and I don't know. Must have been the prayers of our patriarch how I ended up not being jailed. But Christina, who also I think was supervising or coordinating several NGOs, also funded by George Soros, called for my, basically her article said I should be stopped before it's too late. And and after we did an interview with you discussing this article of hers, because I was poisoned, I fell ill under mysterious circumstances. Shortly after that, we discussed this article, and she removed it from everywhere in on the internet. Luckily, we've saved it. And imagine this: when I was dying under chemo, I began writing this journal, which I call the Journal of the Feeble Man, with the sole purpose of not knowing whether or not I would finish this or that chapter, because every day was like a last day. And I said in the beginning of this journal that I'm writing this to help others when they're ill or when they're facing perils. And it became widely followed first in Georgia, then translated into Russia, came out as a book in Georgia and in Russia, won some awards, not for my vanity. And they blocked this journal, Brian. Imagine the dying man who was most likely poisoned with a lethal illness, writing about Plato and Greek mythology and family values and Mount Athos, the writing on his deathbed, and because it's being read so widely, Facebook blocks it. What is this if not fascism and Bolshevism by liberals? And so, look, I think look at the result that Charlie's tragedy brought. Look at the multiplication of his followers. Look at the uproar in the conservative movement, not just in the US, but worldwide. Like this morning, friends asked me, Levan, they called me, many friends from all over the world are calling me, and Levan, you went through so much. We're hoping these British sanctions will not affect you. And how are you holding up? What are you thinking about? And what am I supposed to think when a father of 8 children, all their cards blocked, the winery of my wife and my mother's, everything blocked? And I said, I tell you what I'm thinking about. We have a harvest now at my wife's winery, the most noble of all the businesses that the Georgian men can do. Grow grapes. We are the motherland of vino. Any winemaking encyclopedia in the US, open it. On the forward, you will see that southern slopes of Caucasus are the cradle of winemaking. Go to my favorite London, Vinopolis. You enter Vinopolis, the first stage there is Georgia as the cradle of winemaking. So we have a harvest now, and I have several hundred people at the factory. I have several thousand farmers growing grapes, feeding their families, if I buy these grapes from them. And we work around the clock in this liberal banking system to feed all these people. And I told my friends who called me, what are you thinking? I said, I'm thinking about the peasants who grow the grapes near Tbilisi. How am I gonna go through this harvest? And so, Brian, I don't mean to brag, and I don't mean to appear as in some sort of an Iron Man. Although when they put the radar on my heart, it radiates these phosphoric amyloids from my heart ever
Hmm.
since that poisoning,
Yeah.
and my friends are joking about it. And so, every man has his sort of testing point, breaking point. But if we stay true to the eternal Christian values and respectful to our ancestors and loyal and fidel to our wives and children, anything can be overcome. And that's the very spirit I'm with in this another yet unexpected temptation which God allowed upon us.
Well, Levon, I'm going to talk to you again. I think this will be the first story out on this because this just broke yesterday. What I'm going to say to anyone that's listening is if you know people within the administration, they need to know how wrong this is. Georgia geopolitically is critical to America. Many people weren't talking about Ukraine before everything started to go down in 2014 and how important geopolitically Ukraine was. We could have another war on our hands if we don't handle Georgia right. And we have a true ally in Levon who stood up for truth, stood up for the family, stood up for life, and he's an ally. It makes absolutely zero sense that uh, the British government, which are supposed to be our allies, are putting him under sanctions. So we need to talk to people in government and let them know. Secondly, again, I have a relatively small following. That's fine. I want to get my voice out to whoever I can, but there are people out there with so many more folks watching them. Tucker, you had Father Trenum on. You should get Levon on. Steve Bannon, get Levon on. This story needs to get out. This is a very deep story. It's a compelling story. It's a story about a man who, I look at Levon and he's the type of man I want to be like. You want to stand up, you want to fight for truth no matter what. But this is a gross injustice. Finally, everyone, let's pray. Let's pray for Levon, pray for his family, pray for peace. Um, pray that very, very hard hearts would be opened up. Pray even for our enemies. Um, Again, we're going to do another show. I want people to know more about the background. There's a lot more to be said here. What's happening right now in Congress with Joe Wilson leading the charge horribly, a Republican horribly leading the charge to put more sanctions on Georgia from the United States. And someone who I think has been convinced and attached to the Christina Pushaw unfortunate view of Georgia. And so we'll talk again, Levon. We're going to get the word out any way we can. I think we have a part two tomorrow or Monday where we go more deeply into some of the backstory.
Brian, I don't know how to thank you for this. Any support from great friends such as yours is invaluable. And I'm always here for you in your struggle for the true American values. Also, thank you so much for taking on the plan to publish the Diary of the Feeble in English and writing the forward. Looking forward to it. As I was listening to you in the conclusive part, I remembered a funny story when Georgian liberals wrote a collective letter to Elon Musk a few years back. I guess this was back when they considered Elon one of their own. And the subject of the letter was they asked Elon to take me to Mars, to remove me from Georgia. And I laughed back then because I knew Elon's true orientations towards the liberals and the great work he did with slashing together with President Trump at the USAID, which funded the very toxic ideology in Georgia
Huge
all
win
along.
for us. Huge win
Yeah,
for us.
and
Maybe Elon will do an interview with you. That would be something.
be honored to.
Yeah.
I met his dad in Moscow and he visited Moscow, and a great man also. And now I'm thinking maybe it would have been better if Elon took me and my family to Mars to avoid all this. But that aside, let's keep fight. Let's fight, 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 as your great
We're
president
doing
says.
that
Yeah,
together. Fight, fight, fight. We're going to remember what happened to Charlie. I think that what's happening to you, the attacks upon you, are all part of the same sort of, frankly, demonic attack on people who are trying to stand up for truth. And so, God bless you, Levon. We're going to be back
bless
in touch.
you.
We're going to get this out there quickly. There won't be a lot of editing. We just want to get this out.
God bless you and all our great American, British, and Western conservative friends.